Thank you, Dr. Petkoff. It's so nice to have someone with such a great accent all the way from Oxford coming to moderate our panel.
You make me blush again.
Yes. I've had a long time interest in something that is rarely discussed, and that is the impact that women suffer in countries where there are no robust religious freedom protections. So the idea of linking both religious freedom and post-war, pre-war, during war situation with the plight of women is something that not only is of great interest, but is oftentimes unexplored. And this is a pity because in a study conducted by Dr. Valerie Hudson at Texas A&M University, who focuses on security issues, and by the way, this is a mathematical data study. This is an empirical study, not only a qualitative study. She arrived to the conclusion with her team after 3 years of analyzing the data that the number one predictor of a state's ability to achieve peace and reconciliation was how they treated their women, how women were treated in society. And her study, which I encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to look at, it's statswomen.com at Texas A&M, proves something that we need to dig deeper. So in my brief remarks, what I would like to do is talk about 3 places where women fight for basic rights amidst conflict, after conflict, and away from conflict. The first one is Afghanistan, where everyone here knows there has been an enormous issue with war for a very long time. There are 2.5 million widows in Afghanistan. And it seems like their plight doesn't end when they become a widow, but it starts when they become a widow. Most of these women are married before they turn 18. So as a result, the average age of a widow in Afghanistan is 35 years old. 94% of these widows are illiterate. And unfortunately, their tradition dictates that the men provide shelter, the women bear the children, and they stay at home. Sadly, in Afghanistan, most of these widows, if the average age is 35, are not even women, they're just girls. In rural communities, after she spends a year in mourning, the married brother-in-law takes her on as a second wife. So not only do you have to go through the humiliation of being a widow, but now you're forced into marriage with your married brother-in-law. Widows also suffer from social isolation. They're not allowed to attend weddings, they're not allowed to talk loudly, they're not allowed to wear makeup, and they're not allowed to enjoy themselves. There was a terrible story as I was investigating this deeply about a 16-year-old whose husband was killed 7 months after she got married. Well, it turns out that there's a tradition in Afghanistan that if your husband suffers a terrible tragedy within 10 months of getting married, it means that you have cursed the family and brought disgrace to the family. And therefore, you're no longer allowed to get married to anyone else because obviously you bring misfortune wherever you go. Let's go to Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, many women have absolutely no options, so they try to marry young. And if you become a war widow, your property goes to the family of the husband. You no longer have property. You no longer have a way to live. So many of these women fall prey to scams where they are told that if they go to this job agency, they're going to be able to work. And oftentimes, they are taken to other countries like Oman, where they're locked in a room every evening. They're allowed to go out to clean people's houses, and they're locked in those rooms again at night. There's no compensation for these women. There's no vehicle. Most of these women are illiterate. And in Oman, the government hasn't set up a mechanism for these women to ask for assistance. Post-war, escaping war, what happens in refugee camps to many of these women? I'll just bring one example in Greece. Many of the women who flee conflict come from different backgrounds and different religions. There are many stories of families that convert to Christianity in Turkey. The husband is killed. The women with the family flee to other countries like Greece. And once they get to those refugee camps, the whole dynamic that exists in the Middle East exists in a microcosm. In many cases, their tents are set on fire. They're kicked out of camps. They're told to go outside and beg. And when they call the police, oftentimes the police says they're too afraid of the mobs to come in and intervene. It's a dire picture, but I'm one for action, not one to just walk away sad. So this is a great opportunity for us. This challenge presents a great opportunity, and that is that in all of these cases, had these countries had robust religious freedom protections, had these countries had an educated population and religious leadership abided by laws that protected these women wouldn't lose their property, they wouldn't lose the ability to raise their children, they would be in a much better situation. And why is this an opportunity? Because about a year ago, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, where I serve as vice chair, started to explore the idea of women's rights and religious freedom and the intersectionality. To a person we talked to, they said that this would be a repulsive idea for the feminist movement because, after all, religion is medieval, retrograde, something that oppresses women. And my experience has been entirely the opposite. Every time I have met with women's groups that advocate for women's rights, they have agreed 100% that robust religious freedom protections in these countries would benefit women greatly. So whether these women are working with victims of female genital mutilation, which is oftentimes done in the name of religion, by the way, falsely, there's no religion that calls for this, or whether these women groups are dealing with honor killings or with patriarchal societies that leave their women behind, to a person. So we can, first of all, we can double the amount of advocates for women's rights and for religious freedom if we collaborate and use coalitions. Second, everyone today is talking about war and the terrible effects of war. We had the first minister-level meeting on religious freedom, and people forget that one of the greatest declarations on human rights came out at a time that we had just ended a war. In 1948, imagine all those delegates getting together to talk about the lofty goals of human rights. There was famine. There were people who didn't have a place to live, people who were mourning their entire family being killed in the Holocaust. And precisely because of the experience of World War II and the Holocaust and the pictures that came out of the Holocaust, these people got together and said, we must have a declaration on human rights. That moment is now. This fall will be the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's time for us to form a collaborative relationship to all of these ministers in all of these countries that were here yesterday. Think about it. While we were meeting in our side events and talking about these issues, there were 82 like-minded countries who were telling our State Department here in Washington, D.C., what they were planning to do about the promotion of religious freedom, as Ambassador Brownback said. In closing, I like to say that last year I was invited to go to Oxford University with a colleague of mine to present the report that USERF had just finished. My first thought was of my father, who never Cuban, he escaped Fidel Castro's Cuba, and one of his biggest challenges in life was learning English. So he was very proud that his children, in spite of having an accent, spoke English. And I thought my father would be super excited that I'm going to Oxford. He passed away 10 years ago, because the best English in the world is spoken in Oxford. I'm like, yes. So I over-prepared for the presentation. I read everything. I read all the reservations and all the UN laws. And someone, actually, it was my colleague here, Dr. Peter Petkov, towards the end of the conversation said, wait a second, if it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are women subhuman, superhuman? And at the time, I quipped, well, superhuman, but I wasn't ready. Well, okay, it's okay to laugh, we know. At the time, it occurred to me, it was a very serious question that all of a sudden we would have to tease away women's rights from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as if the word human did not include women. Ladies and gentlemen, sadly, at the time of the declaration, it was those people in the concentration camps that were considered subhuman by the German regime, and they were killed in the millions. Sadly, right now, we have to make sure that women in all of these countries, particularly in war-torn situations, are not treated as subhuman, and we have to stand by them so that they have the same dignity and the same rights that everyone in the universal community of humans should have as well. So I encourage you not to think about all the bad things only, but to think about how these challenges present terrific opportunities for us to collaborate and work together on these issues that come to the core of who we are, and the right that allows us to live according to our deeply held convictions. I cannot think of any work more important than that. Thank you very much.